Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions every Wednesday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about things that might have an impact on you and your daily lives here in little old Stewart or in Martin County, Florida, in the USA, in the world. Who knows? Now we have to deal with space and the SpaceX, Space Force. Just for those of you that are new listeners, we kind of talk about economic issues and the impact that those might have on our economy locally. Some of the things that might come into play, and it's kind of just a general talk show type discussion. You're free to call in 220-9788, 220-WSTU if you want to make a comment. We just ask keep it civil, and you have to agree with me. You don't have to agree with Evan, but you have to agree with me when you call in. But other than that, and if you don't, well, Evan is he's actually a technology wizard. He keeps all this stuff running. If you ever saw, it's I think I kind of equate the studio to, let's say, my father grew up on a farm. You know how instead of going into the kitchen and turning on the water, you kind of had to go back out into the yard and kind of pump for a while to get some buckets and carry it in. That's kind of sometimes where we're at here. It just depends on whether it's raining. It just depends on whether or not the little cap to the pen actually sticks in the button to keep things from not echoing back in your ear. But Evan's that guy. He's a tech guy. So if you really tick him off, he probably could send stuff to your home phone that will cause you all kinds of problems. But feel free to call anyway, 220-9788, 220-WSTU. No, we're, some of the things we talk about on the show are just some of the things that are happening that maybe some people, aren't familiar with. And so with a lot of things, I don't like to say that people don't maybe don't know per se, or don't have the education on. It's not that. It's not a question of somebody being smarter than somebody else, that type of thing. It's a question of sometimes we just aren't exposed to stuff. And in my life, I've been fortunate, plus or minus, I've been exposed to a lot of stuff, and it's not all been good. It is interesting that you learn the most. I think you learn the most from your failures, not your successes. So the guy that always wins is really probably not going to be the guy that learns the most. But take it from a loser. I have learned a lot over my lifetime. I have a few wins, but I've suffered a few of the pangs of being out there and not having things work out the way that you would have anticipated. And as a result of that, you kind of are fortunate to get to kind of see some things that happen. Also, background wise, I was lucky. I started out with one of the big CPA firms with Arthur Andersen. I was with them for a few years up in Chicago, and had the opportunity to. I was in their banking division, so I had an opportunity to really see some of the cutting edge stuff that was going on. The interesting thing about banking, both from a CPA perspective as an auditor and from later on actually working for banks, is that and managing banks, is that banks are forced to be right at the start of a lot of things that happen, because most of those things involve financing and the bank's involved in it. So, and if the bank's loaning money on it, they have to understand what's going on. So it's interesting that and banks are at the, they're the free enterprise financial systems, or at least they used to be. And so many times they're right out there with some of the new products that are out, some of the new things that are out, either for their own use or for their customers' use. So, banks were one of the first ones to have to deal with futures transactions, interest rate futures transactions. They were one of the first to have to deal with rate swaps. They've been the first to deal with imbalances in their structures, called a gap analysis. They were out there on that. They dealt with a lot of loans firsthand, sale leaseback transactions that are relatively complicated with big companies, and a lot of different things. Plus, they also deal in their customers' business. So I remember when I was in banking in Illinois, we were dealing with with actually grain futures, because we had a big customer that was a river terminal, they call it. It was that's a business that acts as a liaison between the farmer and their crops and the large international companies that Archer Daniel Midland, some of those companies that actually process all that grain, and they deal in millions and millions of bushels of different products, soybeans and everything else, corn and all kinds of things. So it was interesting because we got to learn. I got an opportunity from the banking side to try to help that customer avoid the risks of swings. Although they're minor in terms of the cost, maybe pennies, but when you're talking millions of bushels of grain, a cent or two can make a huge difference. So, it's an interesting environment, and so I've been fortunate to kind of deal with some of those kind of things, both hands-on and professionally with the CPA business, and then later on in the banking business. Plus, for a number of years in the banking business, I actually was involved in starting banks called de novos, and that was an interesting process because banking is highly regulated. It's almost like being part of the government sometimes. It's very frustrating for a very libertarian person like me that wants to say, look, let's let people, decide. Let's let the community decide, that kind of thing. That doesn't happen in banking. It was funny. I remember one of the early on the banks that I was involved with, we had been open, I think, probably a year or so. And we decided that, and things were going pretty good. We're still getting going, but and you've got a lot of infrastructure costs in starting a bank. In those days it was 2 or 3 million. Nowadays it's 10. But we were getting started, and I remember our board consisted of a lot of local business people, and one of the local business people, I think, was in a real estate business or whatever, and said, "Oh, let's open a branch in Jensen Beach." And the guy said, "Yeah, I know there's a perfect spot. Yeah, let's do that. I can get, we can get it done. I think we can be open in 90 days." And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And you have to say, well, you can't do that. Why can't we do that? What are you trying to do? Why are you trying to, what? Well, first of all, you have to apply. You have to do a study because you have to turn in the study showing there's a need. And he said, well, obviously there's a need. Well, yes, obvious to us, but unfortunately, that's not the way the government works. And so you have to do this study, you have to pay this consultant, you have to hire this attorney, you have to do this. And you have to get approved by the state, and then you have to get approved by the federal government. You have to show you're meeting your Community Reinvestment Act provisions, and that, for your existing branch, because they're not going to let you have a new one. And boom, 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 boom. And this guy's like, well, that's crazy. So how long are we looking at? I said, well, if we do it exactly right, we're looking at about a year. And he's like, I'm done. And actually, to tell you the truth, that's how, ultimately it was kind of how the decision was made to say they were done. Many of the banks I was involved with never were long-term, because ultimately, the CEO in most cases, who was the one that got the group together to start the bank, they kind of had said, we can get this bank together, and you put up your money, and in a few years it'll be worth triple what you invested, and it's a safe investment and all of that kind of thing. And so that's a lie, by the way. But anyway, that's what happened a lot of times. And so then, at some point the investors would say, I want out, and I want my, and then it wasn't worth that kind of money yet. You have to get to a certain point before anybody's willing to buy you at even 1 times what you put up, let alone 3 times. So it was very frustrating for the business people that were on the board. And many of them were very successful, wealthy people. It was just very, very, very frustrating for them. And many of them ended up getting out because of that. But anyway, so it's an interesting process because you get to see all that stuff that goes on, and then of course with the de novo banks, the startups, you're actually also starting a business too. So you get to deal with purchasing and local, and what kind of local vendors and what kind of businesses you're going to do and how you're going to do it, and what you purchase and how you purchase it, everything from copiers to computers to everything else. So it was an interesting process. It was a very interesting because you were out there really, even technology wise, for example, in the day, the banks were at the edge of technology in terms of trying to get things done. I remember one of the big banks I was with. It was almost it was 600 million. So it was up over $500 million, and they were at the time. This was before, believe it or not, was before we had the PC that was out there, before we had really before Microsoft's operating system was dominant, the old DOS days before that. And our bank was actually, our DP people were considering what system they should go to for these new mini computers, these new PCs, or whatever they were going to call them at the time. And of course, a lot of banks used NCR or Burroughs, and our bank was a Burroughs shop, as they said, and because Burroughs made a really good mainframe, particularly for banking. And so in those days, it was all about the hardware. And so it was an interesting thing because the industry had all kinds of problems back then in the banking industry, because these banking tech guys, they all were about the hardware. Oh, this is a great machine. This is a great machine. And so, but they weren't about the software. And at the time, Burroughs came out with a system called BTOS, which was it was actually a pretty good operating system, but there was no software that ran on it. I mean, there was one spreadsheet program that ran on it, and that was about it. And of course, by then, Gates had, the genius that he was, the open architecture. There were already hundreds and hundreds of programs that would work on the PC. The problem was the PC was just that, a personal computer. It was not designed to be used in a network environment. Now, think about it. This is a long time ago. It was an individual PC. The software got loaded on your individual PC. The thing about the BTOS system is it was a chain system. They were actually designed to be used in a network environment or individually. So it was actually great hardware. It was better hardware than the stuff that was coming out of IBM and all of that kind of thing. It was a better hardware system, but there was no operating system for it. It's kind of like when the Apple and the Mac came out. It was great hardware and a great operating system, but you didn't have anything that could run on it, especially business-wise. There was no accounting programs that would run on it, really. It was very, very limited. It was great for marketing and all of the kind of things that you might do from an ad standpoint. And so, typically when I would go in later on as a CPA, you go into a client. If the client is in the marketing business and the ad business and that kind of thing, PR, whatever, boom, they all had Macs. And then they had one PC that they hid back in the corner back there that ran their accounting system. And then, but if you went anywhere else, everybody else was running all PCs. And so it was interesting when I first got started as a CPA, the technology wise, we had my only client, because I wasn't in the accounting business at the time, the CPA business at the time. I started from scratch. I had one client when I started, and that client was a Mac shop. So I had to buy PCs because all of my clients that I knew I was going to get were going to be running off of PCs. But at the time, I had to run software that would run on both the Mac and the PC. And it was interesting. The old Peachtree software and Intuit that makes Pro Series, from a tax standpoint, those were the ones, and then later on QuickBooks, but those were the ones that would run in both shops. They would run it, and of course Microsoft Word and Excel both worked in a PC and a Mac environment. So I was able to really, and what a lot of people don't realize is that the data files were interchangeable. I mean, you could physically transfer over the data file, and run it on a Mac or a PC. It was really, really kind of interesting. But those were the days when. But that was kind of cutting edge technology, even at even at a small level, you were dealing with all of these issues. And that's the thing about banking and about the CPA industry. You get to deal with all of these issues and kind of ahead of time. And so, um, and so the reason I say that is it's helped me. I know right now in this situation, trying to figure out what is going on with these loans, with the payroll protection program loans, with the economic injury development disaster loans, the EIDL and the PPP, and kind of deal with how to handle those, because I know how the banks are handling it, and that helps to understand. When you understand how somebody is making money, you can understand how then to approach that situation. And you hear people talk about win-win, and that's kind of a misnomer. I mean, it's unusual that on a transaction that both sides get everything they want. That doesn't happen. That doesn't usually happen. But what I found in many cases is that you can have a win-win in that everybody walks away from the table happy. They don't always get everything they want, but they get the main things they want. And many times, I've seen people negotiate deals where they negotiate it to the point that they want everything they want to get, and that ultimately doesn't work, because what happens is this, and we've seen it in politics today, is that when you put up a proposal, a package, a business transaction, whatever it is, and you're sitting there saying, I want this, 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 and this. And then, but of all of those things, there may only be a couple things that are really, really important to you. I got to have these two things. The rest of the stuff I want, but I've got to have these two things. Well, if the person that's on the other side of the table knows that you want those two things, and those two things don't impact them because it's not the two things that they're most interested in, okay, then you do have a win-win. The person that's the buyer, they get what they want. And the seller, they get the main things they want. They don't get everything they want. So what I've seen from time to time is that a party will negotiate and try to get everything they want. And no offense to attorneys, but that's why you never have an attorney negotiate a deal for you. Not because they're, and some people think it's because they're poor business people. It's not because they're poor business people, but attorneys are pretty much, a lot of times, they're pretty much focused on getting the absolute best thing that they can for their client. And so many times they won't get their client to, say, okay, here's the things that you need to give up, type thing. They're not negotiators typically until they get into court or settlements and things. They're good at that. That's why I say they're really pretty good at negotiating transactions. But a lot of times when they go into a deal, for a business deal, startup for a business or whatever, a partnership agreement, whatever, they have a tendency to want to get all of the things, and you can't get all of the things. Part of any business transaction is there's some give and take, and attorneys generally are taught, their job is to protect and to get everything that they possibly can for their client. So they don't really care about that that the other client might want that and might not want it. So what I was getting at is it is good to understand that, because I've seen I've seen a lot of successful transactions where everybody walks away from the table, not ecstatic, I got everything, but, well, we got what we came for. We're good. And they walk away from, with that. It's kind of like that with the PPP loans to some degree. You've got some people that say, I absolutely have to get everything forgiven. And then you've got some people that, and that's a difficult situation, because you're now dealing with the government on the other side, and it's going to be very hard sometimes to get 100% of what you want and then not give up something. and so it's very, very difficult to do that because they're so big that they can force you to do whatever they want. So that's the kind of the situation you've got with these kind of with that kind of deal on the PPP. But if you've got somebody that's saying, look, I really want to get as much forgiven as I possibly can, but I also want to accomplish keeping my people employed. I want to accomplish keeping my business around. If there's a loan for that and it's a short-term loan and I got to pay it back, I'm not unhappy with that as long as the interest rate's reasonable and the terms are reasonable, and there's no prepayment penalty, and I don't have to guarantee it, and those kind of things. So, so depending upon, like I say, where you're at makes a big difference, and that's where that's where it's been good for me from the PPP standpoint, because I understand the PPP are loans that are given by the bank. They're guaranteed by the SBA, but they're actually loans that are made by the bank. So you have to understand what the bank's risks are. Now, the EIDL loan, those are loans made by the federal government. So there's nobody looking over their shoulder other than somebody up higher in the administration, and it may be a different political party by then who's going to come back against them and get on them for what they did. So it's a different situation, because in the EIDL situation, there's those loans are made, like I say, are made by the SBA. There's what they call 7B loans. They're made by the SBA. They've been made for years. Most of them had to do with hurricanes and natural disasters, fires, floods, that kind of thing, where the SBA comes in and they provide financing for damages. And they, it's not money they just give you for business purposes. They're usually funding physical damage. Some of it may be for loss of operations if your business was physically damaged by a hurricane, a storm, a flood, whatever. And that's all. So they've been doing this for years. And as long as, and people have moved up the ladder, and are making large amounts of money in that organization up as you get up, and they have good jobs, good retirement, and the whole bit. So they're not going to screw that up. So when you're dealing with the EIDL side of it, you have to be cognizant of the fact that that is all about job preservation. There's no incentive for somebody to stick out their neck in the EIDL side unless it's going to mean some kind of an immediate promotion to them, or, I mean, not promotion, but basically recognition, maybe solidify their position or whatever, or it's a situation that nobody cares or nobody's looking at it. And so it won't be, there's so many people that could have been involved that it's not going to be them. And so there's kind of a different perspective. And they know that they're going to be second guessed on the SBA side. They know they're going to be second guessed. Their concern is not being second guessed by the SBA. Their concern is being second guessed by whoever is the head of the SBA at the time that things start falling apart. So when these loans, because these are all loans on the EIDL side, when they don't get repaid, that's when the proverbial whatever is going to hit the fan, because at that point somebody's going to be looking for somebody to blame, because now we're past whatever crisis, and now all these things have started to go bad, and now somebody's not going to be able to say, but we saved that business. They don't care at that point. They don't care, because first of all, it was a different administration, probably at that point, and because these are 30-year loans. So what's the chances? I mean, some of these may go on for 8 or 10 years and then, it just don't make it. It could have been that, especially the way the SBA did it, they only gave out $150,000 max. Those are supposed to be $2 million loans to support 6 months of a business's operation. There were clients of mine that were eligible for $500,000, for $800,000, for $1 million, and they got $150,000. Now, they were eligible for that money because that's what it was going to take to run their operation, to cover the deficit for a 6-month period of time. And that won't even cover 1 month. It didn't even cover a month. In fact, many of them got more money on the PPP side than they got on the EIDL side. And the funny thing is, and this is what's so ridiculous, I don't understand why they're not discussing this right now in Congress. well, I do understand, I know why, but I don't, doesn't make sense, is that they're talking about the PPP loans, which are forgiveness, and talking about another round for those companies that have shown their sales have been down for 6 months. That's what the EIDL was. And the EIDL is a loan. It gets paid back. So it doesn't cost the government anything. In fact, at its current interest rate of 3.75% fixed for 30 years as a government guaranteed loan, it's actually worth more money than its face amount. You could sell that loan for a profit because it has an interest rate that's higher than the going rate, which means that whoever owned that loan, in this case, the U.S. Treasury, can sell that loan and make a profit. So they don't even have the risk. The loan's been sold. They may have a guarantee on it that they've got, but that loan gets sold and they get their cash back. So they're not out any cash. They don't have any loss unless the loan doesn't get paid back. And, by spreading it out over 30 years at 3.75%, most businesses will be able to handle that because they'll be able to get through the business cycle had that money been big enough. But they cut that. And that was an arbitrary decision that was made somewhere in the upper echelons of the SBA. I don't know where. I don't know if it came from, from the Secretary of the Treasury, who is ultimately in charge of all of that, or if it was made by the head of the SBA. I forget what her name is, but the person that's there, somebody made that decision, and it was made after the fact. It was not in the law, and in fact, money had actually been distributed under the EIDL at $500,000, which was the internal number that they were going to use. What the SBA had decided internally is that if you had an EIDL loan of $500,000 or less, you didn't have to prove loss. They were just giving you that as a loan. You didn't have to prove loss. You didn't have to guarantee it. I think what they were originally going to do is if it was over 200, you had to guarantee it, but it was unsecured guarantee. You didn't have to pledge any real estate or anything else. It was a blanket UCC just covering assets. So it was something that works for most people, and it has worked efficiently for them for years and years. But all of a sudden, somebody internally made a decision after they had started the process, after they had distributed money at a higher level. They made the decision not only not to distribute money at $500,000, but they made the decision to cut the maximum loan amount from $2 million to $150,000 without any kind of congressional or administration approval on that. How that happened and why that happened, I have no idea, but it was a disaster because that was the money that was going to get everybody through, not the PPP. That money was just going directly from the government to people, and it was, frankly, buying votes. It was the way it was originally structured, and it got applied again without guidance from the administration, internally from the SBA. They made law, which they're not allowed to do. They actually changed the law when they implemented it. Some of that was ratified by Congress later. Some of it was not. And some of it still exists there, and there's going to be lawsuits coming out of this thing down the road. But what I'm saying is that on the EIDL side, the people that made those decisions are the ones that are going to be at risk. And depending upon who's in charge when that happens, they will either be fired because they potentially cost a politician their job or almost cost them their job, or there'll be a new administration there that says, well, we didn't want to do this anyway. We want to help people. We don't want to help business. And so therefore we don't care. Let them go, and you shouldn't have made this loan, get it back, and so I think there's going to be a lot of that. But that's mostly about losing jobs, particularly at a high level where, you've got a lot of power and getting a lot of money. I think Trump refers to it as the swamp, and it is. It's people that are lifetime employees at a very high level within the federal government, but are not necessarily going to be replaced when the next regime comes in, unless they tick off the next regime, and then they're potentially going to lose their job. So, or be forced into early retirement with millions of dollars, I guess. But so that's what's on the EIDL side. That's all about you know, most of us can kind of understand that's more political on that side. It's more about keeping jobs. It's kind of like some of the big companies, it's all about keeping your job as a CEO. It's not what you're really doing for your shareholders or, what you're doing for the country. It's about how much you're getting paid and how long you get to get paid that. But on the PPP side, that's the banks, and it's a significant factor on that side to understand what's going on. These are the loans that are supposed to be forgiven. And by the way, in this next bill that's being proposed, which I'm not holding my breath, it is one of those included in that is going to be an automatic forgiveness. So what they're trying to include in this next, if it gets in there, is that on a PPP you had to meet certain criteria. You had to maintain employment fully. You had to add FTEs. You had to maintain us and spend a certain amount on income. On salaries. You had to do all of that, and most of the companies have gotten the money and spent it, so they've done all of that. But what was becoming difficult on the forgiveness side is that because the economy didn't recover right away, the businesses that use the PPP money to hire people and keep them employed or keep them on payroll now are going to have to potentially lay them off because the economy isn't recovering, so they don't have any way to pay those people. And so unless there's another round of PPP, which there's unlikely, there's money out there already, and they're talking about any new PPP money, you'll have to show that your sales are down by 50%, which most people can't do. They're probably hovering somewhere at that level, but not at 50%. So I don't know who those businesses are. Those businesses are also not going to probably be able to meet the criteria to get funded because they probably got other issues that are going to potentially make them a risk. And so the bank's going to have problems funding that, even though there's a guarantee, because those loans may not be, they may go bad before they're forgiven. So let's go to the PPP side and understand what the banks are dealing with. So that loan is called a 7A loan. And those loans have been around for years and years and years. Those loans are not made by the federal government directly, like the 7B loan that the SBA makes directly. That's a loan that comes directly from the U.S. government. The PPP loans are loans that are made by the banks, and they're guaranteed by the U.S. government. In the past, they were guaranteed up to 90%. So the way it worked in the past on the 7A loan is that if you went into the bank and were going to borrow the money, you had to, first of all, you had to meet their lending requirements. So that if they had lending requirements that were more stringent than the SBA requirements, then they had to meet their requirements. So, for example, the SBA doesn't require on a 7A, if you don't have at least 15% equity in your house, the SBA doesn't require that the bank take the house as collateral when they make a 7A loan. As long as they have less than 15% equity in their home, they don't have to do that. So if you're going in to borrow money and you don't own your home, or you're a small business, you don't own your home, you rent, or you don't have 15% equity, or maybe you've taken that equity out and used it for other things, working capital or whatever, then you don't have to put your home up as collateral. And as many of us know, when you borrow money and you use something for collateral, it's very hard to get it released later until the money's all paid off. They're not likely to release it once you got most of the money paid off or that kind of thing. So it gets very difficult if you have your house tied up as collateral. Plus, most of us know that if something happens and you have to file bankruptcy, your primary residence is protected from creditors in bankruptcy, but not from the creditors of the primary residence. So if you have a mortgage on your home, they can still get to your home. They can still make you sell your home. And when you give the SBA your home as collateral, you're giving them a mortgage on the property. So that means that even in bankruptcy, you're going to lose your house. So many people don't want to do that. that was one of the things that was very difficult. But you don't have to if you didn't have a certain amount of equity in your house. But for years here, I don't know if it's still the case, Seacoast had a policy that they take your home as collateral no matter what, regardless of what the equity was. And it was kind of their way of saying, look, we're not your partner in this deal. We want to see that you're vested in this thing. And if you're not willing to put your house up for collateral, we're not willing to make you a loan, because we don't think if you don't believe in yourself, we don't believe in you. I understand that that's an old time banking attitude that comes from way back in the old days, but it really causes problems, because then when Seacoast got into the SBA lending business, they then, because they require that, they had to require that of all of their SBA loans. So if you got an SBA loan, you had to use your house as collateral. Now, I think they probably have changed that by now, because you wouldn't be in the SBA business very long, because nobody will come to you. But that's what I'm talking about. So if you have those requirements, if you have those specific requirements, your requirements are more stringent. You have to follow your requirements. So the banks all understand that. That's been the way it is. And so what happens is, if you follow those requirements and that loan goes bad, you're potentially going to lose 10%. But the rest of it, the government is going to cover. They're covering 90% of it, is what it boils down to. So it allows the banks to make those loans when normally maybe they wouldn't. If they didn't have that SBA guarantee there, they might not make a particular loan if it has more risk, even though it meets the SBA requirement. They may do another loan if they don't have a guarantee on it, because you've heard the old saying, that the banks only lend money to people that don't need it. Well, that is kind of true. And when there's no guarantee on it and they're not getting their cash back and they got to worry about collections, they rank loans. I mean, that's what they do. There's A loans and B loans and C loans, and they rank them. They rank them when they're making them. I mean, they're looking at them from the very beginning. And if you're a C loan and they've got an A loan and they've got a certain amount of money they want to put out, they're going to put it out to the A loan first, and the C loan gets it second. Now, if the C loan becomes an A loan because it's 90% guaranteed by the U.S. government, now you're on equal ground. And furthermore, once you've got that guarantee on it from the SBA, you can sell that loan. So you don't even have the risk anymore. You can sell that loan into the secondary market, and you can get your cash back. And the fact of the matter is, if the interest rate is above market, you might even get a premium, and you might get paid more. So if it's $1 million loan, they might pay you $1.1 million for that loan. You sell it at a gain, you make a profit. Sometimes that's called servicing income, but basically that's what that is. It's a profit. So here's what happens. Here's what is happening on the PPP side. It's working the same way as that, except the guarantee is 100%. And potentially the loan is going to be forgiven. So here's what happens. The banks had to meet the requirements. They had to make sure that they met the requirements. Now, under this loan, it was 100% guarantee, and the SBA waived some of the requirements for the banks. So they didn't even have to follow their own procedures on some stuff, okay? They said, we're not going to make you take collateral. We're not going to do this. We're not going to do that. So the SBA gave them an out. As long as they followed their procedures, as long as they made the loan according to SBA guidelines, all right? So that was the key. Now, those guidelines changed 4 or 5 times, but as a bank, you were grandfathered in if those changed, so that if you made them under the interim final rule that existed at that time, the SBA would not penalize you for that. They would not say, oh no, you gave them too much money. And that's actually what happened. When the rules first came out, April 3rd, people started applying. The loans that people were getting were really higher than they were eligible for, because nobody knew exactly what was included. Some people thought that, it included unlimited salaries for the owners. Some people thought it included retirement plans in total, and retirement contributions for the owners, and health insurance, and that it included all kinds of things. That for self-employed people, it included whatever they got paid. There was all of those things. And then what happened is the SBA continued to come out and limit that, make it less and less and less, so that the owners could only be paid up to what they got the year before in 2019. And so it didn't make any difference if they were part-time in 19 and now they're full-time because they have to come back in and work in the business to keep it going. They could only be paid that part-time wage. They couldn't fund their retirement plan. There was all these kind of things. There was even questions as to what compensation was included in the forgiveness period. So all of that. But what happened though is that if you made a loan based on the original interpretation and then that changed, you didn't have to take back that loan. The SBA was still going to guarantee that loan. Now, in the old days, under the 7A 90% situation, the standard SBA 7A loan, if you made a loan to somebody that you weren't supposed to, let's say that example I was using, you have a policy that you got to take houses as collateral on the primary residence collateral on every business loan, and for some reason or another you don't do it, because even though they had less than 15%, you don't do it. The SBA comes in and looks at your files later and finds out that you violated your own lending policy. You get that loan with no guarantee. Now it's a 90% guarantee is gone, and you now have 100% of the risk on that loan. That might have been too much for you at that point in time. You may not have wanted that. Plus, you may not have been able or be able to sell that loan because it no longer has the guarantee associated with it. So you may have to buy it back and service it. So, and potentially take the loss on that loan. Well, on this new one, the 100%, that's still the case. So if you didn't make the loan correctly, if you made a loan for stuff that you weren't allowed to under the PPP, then the SBA, when they reviewed that loan later, it's not going to be now, but they reviewed it later, they could come back to you and say, nope, this loan didn't qualify. We don't care that it's been forgiven, whatever. You got to take this loan back. You got to get the money from those people or pay this loan off, because frankly, it doesn't qualify. So the banks don't want that. So they were very, very careful about following the rules. Now, they were very aggressive in terms of the amount that they allowed you to get. They wanted you to get the maximum money that you could. Why? Because they're very great and generous people, and they really wanted you as a business to survive. And if you believe that, I've got a piece of property downtown I'd love to sell you. But no, the reason was they get paid fees for this. I don't know if you saw, the big banks made over $1 billion in fees off the PPP loans. That's money they got paid outside of the transactions, not interest. That's money they got paid for just doing the loan, just making the loan, and preparing it. So they made billions of dollars off this thing. And so if the number was less, that would have been less billions. So the higher the number can be within the guidelines of the SBA, the better for them. And that's exactly what they did. All right. So that's the first thing you got to understand. They got paid no matter what. As long as they followed the rules, they were done. They got paid. But now you're saying, well, they still got the loan and, all of that kind of thing. Well, actually, no, they don't, because this is a 1% interest rate on this thing. If it's a loan, it's a 1% interest rate. And it was originally a 2-year loan, now a 5-year loan. But it's a 1% interest. It's a government guaranteed 1% interest. So that's the same as a treasury bill. That's the same as a treasury note. So if you go look at a 1% 5-year treasury note, that thing that's a premium. The current short-term interest rate for these loans or for government money for treasury notes, treasury bills, is almost zero. It's actually negative, and overseas it's negative. They were talking about negative interest rates. It means that the interest rate is zero on a loan. You're paying just for the protection. So now you've got a loan that's got a 1% rate, not a zero, a 1%. So that 1% is worth about 10% of the principal balances. So if you're doing $1 trillion, we're talking a few $100 billion worth of profit that you make from selling that loan off. So there was two ways the banks made money. They made money on the fees on the origination fees for making the loan. And then they turned around and sold the loan out into the secondary market as a government loan. They packaged them and sold them. That they went to retirement plans and 401ks and everything else that people would buy those as part of the mutual funds that are in there. They bought those at a profit. They sold those at a profit. So now here's where the bank is today. They've sold your loan. They made a profit for selling your loan. They originated your loan. They made a profit for originating your loan. They don't have any risk on the loan. They don't have any responsibility from it. They don't even have it. All they're doing is collecting payments on it. They're good. They're done. They got their cash back. They can make another loan. They can do whatever they want. They're done, right? Now comes forgiveness, which is a separate and distinct process from the loan itself. So now we've got forgiveness. Well, what happens in forgiveness? Well, now the bank's back in the picture. Many people thought that the SBA was forgiving the loan. They are not on the 7A loans. They don't do that. What they're doing is the bank is determining whether they meet the criteria for forgiving the loan, and then the bank is going to determine that and is going to apply to the SBA for money to pay that loan off, basically as if it went bad. But they're going to say, no, that they meet the criteria, pay this loan off. The SBA then pays the loan off, and you don't owe that. And the person doesn't owe that money anymore, and the SBA has paid that loan off and taken care of it. Now, if the bank made a mistake and forgives that loan, and they shouldn't have, then the SBA shouldn't have paid that back, and that loan shouldn't have been paid off. And the bank is responsible for that, so they're now going to get that loan back. It's going to be as if they made a mistake on the application. Now, if they make a mistake on the forgiveness, now keep in mind, they have no risk at this point. This is a completely separate transaction, and all of a sudden they're going to be told, if you screw this up, you run the risk down the road. This is going to be 3, 4, 5 years down the road. You run the risk that you're going to get this loan back. What incentive is there for the bank to do that? Zero. They have all risk, no reward. They don't get any more money for doing it. They've already gotten paid. All they do is take risk. So that's where we're at right now. This new bill is making it so that $150,000 loan or less will be forgiven automatically, and there is no requirement. That will take the banks off the hook, so they'll be safe on those. But the bottom line is that's where we're at, and that's why the forgiveness process is very, very dangerous where it's at right now, and why we're stuck where we are right now. Because if I'm the bank, I'm not going to forgive that loan. Why take that risk unless I'm getting paid again, and I'm not getting paid again? So anyway, that's kind of what's going on right now with the PPP loan. So keep that in mind. Thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions, right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's Heritage Station.